Trump collapses. After Jasmine Crockett exposes his shocking past secrets on live TV. He didn't see it coming. Under the blazing Arizona lights, Donald J. Trump stepped onto the stage like a returning king. The crowd roared a sea of signs, flags, and hopeful eyes. The cameras caught him mid-wave, grinning like the showman he'd always been. He threw up 2 thumbs like it was 2016 again. But this wasn't a campaign rally. This was a town hall, a debate, a reckoning. And waiting just off stage in a silent green room, cold enough to numb the nerves, sat a woman who didn't come to entertain. She came to expose. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't fidget. She didn't blink. She sat alone with a manila folder on her lap, not thick, but heavy. Heavy like a verdict waiting to be delivered. She didn't rehearse sound bites. She reviewed names, stories, forgotten truths. Trump had entered the building like a storm. She was the quiet that follows it and buries everything left standing. What happened next was never supposed to happen on live television. It didn't begin with a yell. It began with a nod. Jasmine stepped onto the stage with none of the flash. No smile for the cameras, no handshakes. Just that folder. She placed it gently on the podium like it might shatter. Her presence didn't demand attention. It earned it slowly, relentlessly. The host barely got through the introductions before the game began. Congresswoman Crockett, the moderator, said, "What would you say is the biggest failure in America's current economic system?" Her voice was soft, steady, controlled. Economic failure rarely begins at the bottom. It begins at the top with decisions made behind closed doors. Deals struck that benefit the few, while the rest of us are left to patch up the damage. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that stings louder than any shout. Trump leaned into his mic and did what he always does, mock, diminish, distort. "Oh, give me a break," he scoffed. "Letting people like her get up here and pretend they know anything about building an economy? I've created jobs. Thousands. What's she done? Talked about it." There were laughs, nervous ones. The crowd didn't know yet what was about to hit them. Jasmine didn't blink. She waited, then leaned in just slightly. "You've created jobs," she said, calm as a surgeon. "You've also erased them, sometimes on the same project." And that was the first cut. Silent. Clean. Deep. Trump laughed again, tried to pivot. Called her binder cute. Said you don't run a country with folders, you run it with guts. But that's the thing about guts. Without a brain, they're just noise. "You can run it with guts," she replied. "But if you don't use your brain, you run it off a cliff." The crowd was no longer laughing. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a controlled demolition. Trump bragged. She brought receipts. Trump deflected. She spoke names. Trump performed. She prosecuted. And still, she hadn't even opened the folder. But then he said it. "I've settled cases because it was easier. Not because I did anything wrong." He said it like it meant nothing. Like signing a check was just good business. That's when her fingers touched the folder. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. The room had already changed. When asked about whether those settlements mattered to ethics, Jasmine looked not at the moderator, but at the camera, at the country. "Most people in this country don't have the luxury of settling things quietly," she said. "When your landlord overcharges you, you don't have a legal team. You take the hit. When your boss cuts your hours, there's no press release. You just tighten your belt." Then came the moment her voice dropped even lower. "So when someone like him brushes off a settlement like it's a receipt." "Yeah. I think that matters." There was no cheering, no applause, just a tight silence. Listening. Silence. Trump tried to interrupt, but the moderator stopped him. And for the first time, Donald Trump didn't know what to say. He blinked, fidgeted, tried to laugh. And Jasmine finally opened the folder. One name, then another. Robert Langham, Yolanda Reyes, Brian Walker, Gregory Hunt. Real people, real lawsuits, real damage. One man in the front row, MAGA hat in hand, stood up and left. Not angrily. Not theatrically. Just done. The silence grew. Thick. Uncomfortable. Then Jasmine brought up the veterans. A failed relocation. Broken promises. Deaths in shelters. She looked directly at the camera. His daughter is watching tonight. Trump shifted, reached for his water bottle. His hands were shaking. And still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. That was just the beginning. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. But somehow it echoed. The audience was still. Not the frozen stillness of boredom, but the stillness of realization. Something was happening, and they couldn't scroll away from it. A woman in the fourth row, who hadn't applauded all night, leaned forward with her hand over her mouth. A man in the back sat back in his seat, as if trying to process what his instincts had already told him. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a mirror. And everyone was seeing something they weren't ready for. Jasmine closed the folder, not all the way, just enough to rest her hand on it, like a gavel waiting to fall. Then came the next question. Congresswoman Crockett, the moderator, said, his voice suddenly reverent, like he'd begun to understand his own role in this moment. What would you have done differently during the 2008 financial crisis? She didn't look at Trump. She looked straight ahead, mic-adjusted, hands folded. My father was a mechanic in Santa Fe, she began. 7 days a week. Honest work. We lost our house in 2009. The room contracted. Slowly, as if inhaling grief. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't greedy. He didn't buy too much house. He just didn't get picked when the system had to choose who to save. She paused. Leadership isn't theory to me. It's personal. Trump for once didn't interrupt. His mouth was tight. His eyes scanning the crowd, searching for a break in the dam. Jasmine turned toward him, not confrontational, just direct. Some of us never had the option to just write a check and move on. Then she named another name. Robert E. Langham. Trump's head snapped slightly. Worked security for one of your properties in Tucson. Injured on the job. Claim denied. Calls ignored. Dragged out the case until he ran out of money. You settled, but made sure he could never talk about it. She let the silence after that name stretch longer. I'm not Robert, and I can talk about it. Trump blinked too many times in a row. Attell. The moderator looked startled. The camera crew caught Trump's eyes darting toward his aides backstage. Jasmine reached into the folder, this time not slowly. She pulled out a single photocopy. Held it. Real people, real pain. Buried under legalese and settlements signed under duress. She placed it on the podium face up. Not evidence. A memorial? Another name? Then another. Yolanda Reyes? Brian Walker? Gregory Hunt. She gave them breath. Dignity. Recognition. You asked about leadership, she said to the moderator. Here's the truth who you are. When no one's looking is who you really are when everyone is. Trump laughed a dry, defensive chuckle. Oh, give me a break, he said louder this time. Everyone has lawsuits. You think she's never signed something she regrets? Welcome to politics. Jasmine didn't flinch. There's a difference between shutting someone up and shutting them down. Then it happened again. The silence. That heavy, pregnant silence that doesn't ask for applause. It demands accountability. Trump shifted his stance, reached for the water again. This time, his hand trembled. A few people noticed. One even gasped, just barely audible on the mic. The moderator tried to keep moving. Congresswoman Crockett, are you saying these cases directly affect Mr. Trump's policy decisions? Jasmine didn't miss a beat. I'm saying when you treat working people as disposable in business, don't be surprised when you do the same in government. And that right there was the turning point where a crowd stops watching a debate and starts witnessing a story that sounds uncomfortably like their own. Then she reached for the second document. Daryl Linwood, she said, construction manager, Amarillo, Texas. Trump scoffed, never heard of him. You wouldn't, she said, still not looking his way, but he remembers you. She pulled out a newspaper clipping. held it like a relic. In 2013, you promised luxury condos, ribbon cuttings, hard hat photo ops. 6 months later, poof, permits gone. Contractors unpaid. You vanished. She dropped the clipping on the podium with the others. Daryl lost 2 contracts. Then his marriage. Then his house. Trump leaned into his mic. You don't get to pin every failed deal on me. That's how construction works. Jasmine raised her eyebrow. No, that's how your construction works. More murmurs now. Less doubt. More discomfort. She brought up veterans next. Veterans. A development deal in Bakersfield. Evictions. A canceled rehab program for recovering servicemen. 3 of them ended up homeless. 1 dead. His name was Julius Marquez, she said. And his daughter is watching tonight. That line, like a scalpel. Trump reached for the mic, but the moderator stepped in. Mr. Trump, would you like a moment? But Jasmine wasn't done. These aren't anomalies. She said louder now, not yelling, but unmistakably commanding. They're a pattern. A blueprint of exploitation. A playbook written in NDAs and fine print. Trump turned to the crowd. Tried to win them back. You all see what this is, right? This is theater. Political theater. But even the loyal faces in the crowd weren't nodding anymore. They weren't cheering. They were remembering. Then she asked them something. How many of you have ever signed a contract you didn't fully understand? Hands went up. Quietly. Naturally. Dozens of them. That's when Trump scoffed again. But it didn't land. She's turning this into a therapy session, he muttered. But Jasmine didn't pause. She pulled out a thick stack reports, receipts, photos. A 2015 senior community project, Glendale, Arizona. A Trump-affiliated firm. Took deposits from over 120 families. Many sold their homes in anticipation. Then the funding dried up. She flipped a page. 1 man died, still trying to get his refund. Then she looked up. His son is here tonight. You could hear the breath suck from the crowd. Trump tried to defend. That deal wasn't in my name. It was just a licensing agreement. She cut in, finally turning toward him, not with anger, but precision. You put your name on the sign. You promoted it. You took credit when it looked good. But when it fell apart, you disappeared. The folder was half empty now, but the room had never felt fuller, full of weight, full of history, full of names. And Jasmine Crockett, without shouting, without grandstanding, was giving them back their voice. Trump wasn't the only one trembling now, because the country was waking up, and they weren't looking at him anymore. As Trump stared across the stage, sweat gathering beneath his collar, the silence became louder than anything he'd ever shouted into a rally mic. Jasmine had just named names, laid down receipts, and turned forgotten victims into front-page witnesses, all without raising her voice. The folder wasn't empty yet, but the room already felt like a courtroom. And, Trump, he looked like a defendant who realized the judge wasn't on his side anymore. Worse, the jury was watching with open eyes. The moderator tried to pivot. Let's shift now to infrastructure and labor protections. He said, the script trembling just beneath the surface of his voice. But Jasmine didn't wait for the next prompt. She reached back into the folder with slow, deliberate purpose. Her fingers landed on a transcript gray, photocopied, annotated with highlighter. She didn't lift her eyes from it as she began reading. This is from a 2017 deposition. Pinell County fraud case. Mr. Trump was asked whether he was aware of unpaid workers on a site in Henderson, Nevada. She looked up now. Calm. Still. Under oath, he answered, "That's not my problem. That's a contractor issue." A collective breath caught across the room. Not gasps. Those are for surprises. This was quieter. Heavier. Like hearing your worst suspicion confirmed by the man himself. Trump smirked. Trump. You want to play this game? Every developer in America has said something like that. That's business. That's how it works. Jasmine didn't look at him. That's how you work. Then she picked up a photo. Black and white. A man in a safety vest. Concrete dust on his boots standing beside a wheelbarrow. This is Louis Brasher. He clocked in every day for 6 weeks. Then the subcontractor skipped town. Lewis never got paid, not once. She set the photo down next to the transcript. He died in 2020. Liver failure. Couldn't afford treatment. His wife still works the front desk at a hotel 3 blocks from here. Trump shifted again, adjusted his tie, reached for his water, this time missing the cap. The bottle slipped in his grip before he caught it with the other hand. The moderator cleared his throat. Mr. Trump, would you like to respond? But Jasmine cut in. Not loud, not rushed, just final? No? She turned to the audience. Because people like Louis never got a chance to respond. That was the moment, the fracture, the tipping point. Something subtle moved through the audience, not a riot, not applause, just an undeniable change in posture. People leaned forward, phones stopped recording. Some had tears welling in their eyes, not from spectacle, but recognition. Then came the stumble. It was subtle at first, a shift in weight, a small step back. Trump reached to steady himself on the podium, but his hand landed just left of center. His shoulders slumped for a second too long before snapping upright again. Someone in the second row whispered, "Is he okay?" The moderator hesitated, earpiece pressed to his ear. An aide appeared just off stage. Jasmine remained still, eyes tracking the movement, but her expression unchanged. Trump shook his head slightly, as if swatting away fatigue or reality. "No breaks," he muttered. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. And the cameras knew it. The audience knew it. Jasmine already knew it. Because this wasn't just physical collapse. It was rhetorical, emotional, symbolic. For years, Trump had thrived on control of the room, the narrative, the spectacle. But tonight, control belonged to a folder, and the woman who dared to open it. The moderator tried again. "Mr. Trump, we can take a short pause?" I said, "I'm fine," he barked. But the edge in his voice was gone, the fire replaced by smoke. He stepped back again too fast. His left foot caught the edge of the stage's platform mat. One aide flinched forward. Another mouthed something behind the curtain. Trump wobbled. A low gasp spread through the crowd like static electricity. Then, at the very last second, he caught himself on the podium. His fingers tapped nervously first, fast, then slower, then not at all. The moderator's voice dropped. "Would you like to sit, sir?" But it was Jasmine who ended the moment, not by speaking, but by waiting. She simply reached down and closed the folder. Not a dramatic slam, not a symbol of triumph. Just quiet closure. Trump glanced her way. His eyes weren't angry. They were searching, pleading. Like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the language for it. Jasmine didn't move. Didn't gloat. Because she hadn't come for the collapse. She came for the names. And they'd already been spoken. Aide number 2 stepped onto the stage, whispering into Trump's ear. "They want to evaluate you backstage." He nodded barely. The former president who once loomed over debate stages and roared through arenas now walked slowly toward the curtain. Not dragged, not carried. Just guided. But before he disappeared, he looked back. Not at the crowd. Not at the moderator. At her. At Jasmine Crockett. She didn't return the gaze. She didn't need to. The moment wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the silence he left behind. And as he vanished behind the curtain, the moderator attempted the impossible, reclaiming control. "We'll take a short break while Mr. Trump is evaluated. Thank you for your patience." But there was no clapping. No chatter. Just the sound of people. Sitting with it. Processing. Remembering. And Jasmine, she stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the now closed folder. She took a breath. Then she spoke. "I didn't come here to make a man stumble. I came here because too many people already have. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't cheer. They listened. Because for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't performing. They were remembering. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished yet." As the crew scrambled behind the scenes, as advisors whispered frantically into comms, as Twitter feeds exploded, and producers barked into earpieces, trying to figure out if they'd just captured a political implosion, live on national TV. Jasmine Crockett stood exactly where she had stood all evening. Still, composed, waiting. The cameras remained on her even as the moderator fumbled for what to do next. This wasn't part of the format. This wasn't in the prep packet. Nobody plans for a collapse, especially not one so silent, so symbolic, so absolute. Jasmine didn't need a new line. She didn't need a pivot. Because this wasn't a performance. It was a culmination. And now, with Trump gone from the stage, his figure swallowed by the curtains, his voice absent for the first time in decades of political noise, America was hearing something else. Truth. And it wasn't loud. It was steady. The moderator, finally regaining enough composure to speak, approached the mic carefully. Congresswoman Crockett, if you'd like to conclude your remarks. But Jasmine was already speaking. I didn't spend the last 3 weeks preparing this folder because I wanted a moment like this, she said. I did it because someone needed to say it. Out loud. In a place where it couldn't be edited, silenced, or buried beneath clickbait. No one moved. No one coughed. No one scrolled. This was the kind of silence that only comes when something real is finally being said. Then she stepped away from the podium. Not dramatically, not as a victory lap. Just a quiet, deliberate walk to the edge of the stage where her campaign manager, Daria, was waiting. Backstage phones were exploding. YouTube streams were splicing clips. Hashtags began crawling across the digital sky. Folder truth? You are Marquez's daughter? The Crockett moment. On TikTok, users stitched the same segment over and over again, Jasmine unmoving while Trump was guided offstage by aides. But none of that was in Jasmine's mind yet. She had walked behind the curtain, handed off the folder to Daria, and sat finally on the same bench she'd waited on before the debate began. Except now, the world was different. And it hadn't even been an hour. They're already calling it the collapse, Daria said, eyes flicking across the notifications piling up on her tablet. Some are saying you pushed him too far. Jasmine didn't answer right away. I didn't push him, she said. The truth did. And it wasn't just cable news hosts or pundits reacting. A message had arrived from someone unexpected, Rochelle Marquez, Julius Marquez's daughter. You said his name. I didn't think anyone ever would. I just wanted to say thank you. Jasmine stared at the message for a long time. He should have never been forgotten in the first place, she whispered. By the time they arrived back at their modest campaign hotel in Tempe, news coverage had gone wall to wall. Every network, every panel, every opinion. Some declared it political theater, others called it justice in real time. But none of the noise could dilute the impact of the facts that had been laid out on that podium like evidence in a trial. Jasmine didn't change into sleepwear. She stayed in her campaign clothes, creased now, but still composed, and stood by the hotel window watching Tempe's quiet streets below. The town looked the same, but her world had shifted on its axis. Daria handed her a coffee. They're calling it the most impactful political moment of the decade. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Who's they? Daria smiled, flipping open her laptop. Take your pick. MSNBC? A seismic reckoning? CNN Crockett didn't attack. She revealed. Fox. What's next for Trump after the onstage episode? But Jasmine wasn't reading headlines. She was reading another message. Denise Hall, Oklahoma. Her husband had worked on a failed Trump golf resort near Broken Arrow. They lost everything. She'd never told anyone the full story until tonight. Jasmine replied with 4 words, I'm listening. Always will. Then, without announcing it, she requested a brief statement. No press junket, no media tour. Just her a single camera and the courtyard behind the hotel. She wore a plain white blouse. No stage lighting, no teleprompter. She looked directly into the lens. Last night wasn't about a political win, she said. It was about people who were told their pain didn't matter. She paused. I didn't plan for what happened, but I'm not surprised. The weight of so many truths finally knocked something loose. And then she said the line that would play again and again across every social platform, stitched into hundreds of edits. We cannot keep pretending that silence is strength, that looking away is leadership. If we want something better, we have to call things what they are, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. When she stepped away from the camera, there was no applause. No cheering. Just a producer wiping her eyes. Just a staffer nodding solemnly. Back upstairs in her room, Jasmine sat with a growing pile of handwritten letters and forwarded emails from the campaign office. Most were what you'd expect supporters, critics' offers, but one envelope caught her eye. It was addressed in pencil. Blocky handwriting. No return address. Inside a note from an 11-year-old girl named Kaylin. My mom said I should watch you because you were brave and didn't yell. You said things like you had to. My dad didn't get paid at his job for 3 weeks. We had to move. My mom cried a lot. Thank you for standing up for people like us. Jasmine didn't cry. She just read it again. Then folded the letter, placed it next to the photo of her Uncle Ray, and whispered into the room. Now they're listening. Tomorrow, the floodgates would open. But tonight, Jasmine Crockett sat in a quiet hotel room, the folder finally closed, the name still echoing. And this wasn't the end. It was the moment America stopped scrolling and started remembering. By morning, the world that Jasmine Crockett stepped into was not the same one she had debated in just hours earlier. What had started as a single voice at a podium had rippled across an exhausted nation, louder than any ad campaign, more enduring than a news cycle. Jasmine wasn't viral, she was vital. The folder may have closed in her hotel room the night before, but its contents had already detonated far beyond Arizona. Screens across America weren't just playing the footage, they were playing the silence. The look on Trump's face. The steady conviction in Jasmine's voice. The way names like Julius Marquez and Louis Brachet were spoken with reverence instead of rhetorical utility. It wasn't theater. It was testimony. And America wasn't just watching anymore. It was reckoning. Daria was already up before sunrise, her phone lit with notifications from every direction. Press, politicians, people from small towns Jasmine had never stepped foot in. Their stories weren't brief. They were pouring in like a tide that had been held back too long. Jasmine stepped out of the bathroom towel, in hand, hair damp, no makeup, no blazer. Just herself. The window behind her cast an orange haze over the carpet as the desert sun began to creep in. They're asking for you on every network, Daria said, not looking up from her screen. Meet the Press wants a Sunday special. PBS is asking for a sit-down. Even The Guardian called. Jasmine sat on the bed, looking down at her hands. I didn't ask for this. No. Daria said, eyes softening. But maybe this asked for you. Jasmine gave a faint smile, then reached for the note she'd written the night before. Don't forget Ray. She folded it again, neatly, and tucked it into her coat pocket. There were more stories to be told, more names to be remembered, and the country for once seemed ready to listen. Before she stepped into any interviews, Jasmine made one request: a stop at a local veterans shelter in downtown Phoenix. No cameras, no fanfare, just conversation. When she walked in, the staff didn't ask for selfies. A tall man at the desk with a crooked jaw and soft eyes just nodded and said, We've seen the clip. We know what you did. Jasmine sat with 3 residents, 2 men, 1 woman each, with stories eerily similar to the one she told about the Bakersfield property. Lease terminations, promises unfulfilled, programs shuttered, a familiar pattern that stretched across states, cities, and years. Most of us stopped talking about it, the woman said, because nobody cared. Jasmine didn't speak for a moment. She just sat with them. Then she said quietly, They care now. By noon, her campaign email inbox had locked up. The IT team couldn't even count the unread messages anymore. They were coming in from every state. From factory workers in Ohio. From housekeepers in Nevada. from displaced retirees in Florida who still had folders of correspondence with the Trump organization that led nowhere. One message stood out I'm writing because my husband worked on a Trump development in the Poconos in 2012. He was laid off with no notice. Told the funds dried up. We never recovered. Our son dropped out of school to help cover bills. Last night was the first time I heard someone say it out loud. Thank you. Please keep going. Keep going. It was both a plea and a mandate. Jasmine's team held a strategy session at 2:00 p.m. at a borrowed office space just off South Mill Avenue. The whiteboard had one word at the center. Now what some advisors pushed for a tour. Others for a national interview blitz. But Jasmine held up Kaylin's letter. Just the folded notebook paper, written in blue ink stars drawn around her name. She didn't write this because I made headlines, Jasmine said. She wrote it because she saw something she wasn't used to seeing, someone who stood still and told the truth. The room quieted. So no spectacle, Jasmine continued. If we do this, we do it right. Ground level. Human first. That night she made a new recording, not for cable news, but for social media. Shot in natural light, unedited, just her and the camera speaking plainly. You've heard a lot about what happened on stage, but this isn't about a moment. It's about a pattern. A pattern that left too many people behind while others built towers off their silence. I opened that folder to speak for them, and I'm not closing it until the country hears them too. It went live at 7:14 p.m. By 8:00 p.m., it had 4 million views. By 10:00 p.m., it was being translated subtitled in Spanish and Vietnamese, even in Tagalog, by a community news outlet in California. By midnight, a man named Martin Wu posted a video with tears in his eyes, holding up a paycheck stub from a job he never got paid for in a Trump-owned casino in Atlantic City. I didn't even know I was still angry, he said, until she said my story. A new hashtag began trending, actors say their stories, and Jasmine Crockett's inbox became a repository of grief, of betrayal, of lives steamrolled and dignity deferred, but it also became something else, a registry of remembrance. Jasmine read each message herself, not all in one sitting, not for press, but because if she asked the country to remember, she had to be the first one to carry that weight. Late that night, she sat alone at the edge of her hotel bed, still dressed, the TV on mute, her phone buzzing beside her, the world spinning fast outside. She pulled out the folder again, not for drama, just to hold it. Just to remind herself that it began not with applause, but with names. And tomorrow, there would be more of them. She held the folder like a compass. Not because it pointed toward fame or favor, but because it kept her from forgetting. It reminded her why this all began, why every name inside it mattered more than any headline, more than any poll bounce, more than the firestorm erupting on every news channel in the country. And, as the night quieted around her, Jasmine Crockett understood something most politicians spend careers avoiding. You don't need to speak louder. You need to speak for someone. Morning came fast. The Arizona sun cracked over Tempe's rooftops with that dry, relentless certainty. Daria entered the room with 2 coffees, a laptop already open under her arm, and a schedule that had ballooned overnight. CNN wants a sit-down this morning. PBS in the afternoon. 2 international press requests came in while you were sleeping. And the Biden campaign wants to speak. Jasmine didn't flinch. She took the coffee, glanced at the laptop screen, her face plastered across a dozen thumbnails, and gave a single nod. But her eyes weren't on the headlines. They were on the folder. Because even now, as the political machinery started revving at full tilt, Jasmine knew what mattered most wasn't the attention, it was the truth behind that attention. It was the people who were finally being heard. Like the voicemail left by a man in his 60s with a gravel, rough voice who simply said, "You don't know me, but I know what it's like to be shut up and paid off. You gave my silence a sound." Or the handwritten letter delivered to the campaign office that morning from a janitor in Tulsa named Ed. They said my complaint would go nowhere, that I was lucky to have a job. I was fired after calling out safety violations at a property with Trump's name on the lease. No one listened. Till now. My daughter showed me your clip. I cried. And I'm not the kind of man who does that. And then there was Kaylin, the 11-year-old who wrote Jasmine a second letter, this one on fresh paper in a tighter hand. She'd written it with her teacher's help. It read, "My mom said sometimes a truth needs to echo. I think your truth is echoing." That line stuck in Jasmine's mind as she stepped onto her first national interview of the day. Clean white shirt. No makeup crew. No hair team. Just her. And the folder. Always the folder. The journalist leaned forward, reading from a stack of notes. Congresswoman Crockett critics say what happened the other night was well-rehearsed political theater designed to dismantle your opponent emotionally rather than engage in policy debate. What do you say to that? Jasmine didn't blink. I didn't bring theater. I brought testimony. If that undid him, that speaks more about the weight of the stories than the way I told them. The interviewer pressed further. And what's next? Do you consider this a turning point in your career? A presidential bid? Senate Jasmine smiled faint but clear. I'm not chasing titles. I'm chasing accountability. That answer lit up every clip show that night. But more importantly, it resonated where no campaign slogan could reach living rooms, break rooms, dorm rooms, coffee shops where people had stopped caring about politics because it had stopped caring about them. Now, they were paying attention again. Not because someone shouted louder, because someone finally said what they lived through. That evening, Jasmine attended a quiet roundtable with a group of former subcontractors and whistleblowers from failed Trump projects. No live stream. No press. A man named Julio stood up, weathered hands a limp from an old injury. I lost more than money, he said. I lost belief. Belief that anyone in power even sees people like us. You brought that belief back. Jasmine didn't give a speech in return. She didn't need to. She just said, "You shouldn't have had to wait this long." Back at the hotel that night, the team gathered in the suite. Daria had her laptop open, cross-checking interview requests. A junior staffer updated the digital archive, where stories from across the country were now logged, every message, voicemail, screenshot, and email, tagged by state and industry. They called it the Reckoning File, but Jasmine Shees sat at the window, again folder in her lap. And when the buzz of the room dimmed, she turned and said, "I want to go to Bakersfield." Everyone paused. Now Daria asked, "It's not even on the schedule." "I don't care," Jasmine replied. "I want to stand on the ground where they lost everything. I want to look those families in the eye." By 9:00 a.m., the next day, they were on the road. No motorcade, no media alert. Just Jasmine, Daria, and two staffers in a nondescript SUV crossing California highways into the dry, cracked land where those veterans had once been promised housing and instead were handed eviction. When they arrived, the lot was still empty. The weeds had grown tall. The sign with Trump's name had been painted over, but the outline was still visible beneath the cheap gray wash. Jasmine stood in the middle of the dust-blown silence folder in hand. She looked at the space like someone reading a wound. "This is where the silence started," she said. Daria nodded. "And this is where it broke." Jasmine reached into her folder, not to pull out a document, but to place something in. A photo of Julius Marquez. She slid it into a plastic sleeve and tucked it into the front flap. Then from her coat pocket, she took the notepad paper where she'd written, "Don't forget Ray." She added it too. The folder wasn't just a vessel of evidence anymore. It had become a living archive, a mobile monument, a quiet oath. That night, as they checked into a modest motel off Highway 99, Jasmine sat alone outside her room under a humming fluorescent light. The folder rested beside her on the bench. She looked out at the empty parking lot and whispered, "They tried to disappear you, but I see you. I carry you." And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from a man in Georgia who'd been following the story silently. He said, I didn't believe in any of this. Politics? Promises. But last night I showed my son your video. He asked me what a hero was. I told him someone who remembers what the world tries to forget. Jasmine replied, I won't forget. And I won't stop. Because for her, this was never about taking power. It was about taking names and making them impossible to erase. And as she turned off her phone, leaned back against the wall, and looked up at the night sky, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt ready. Ready for whatever storm came next, because she knew now the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to outlast the silence.